Hello, everyone, and welcome to God Talks with Reverend Goodwin. This week, I have a very special guest, Dr. Cheryl Baker, but I've always known her as Dr. Cheryl Presley. She became the Vice President for Student Affairs at Boston College, I believe, my sophomore year. And I was in a training with student government. And as a student, to be honest, I don't know how many times I had actually seen an African American leader. Definitely not in my college experience before she came in the role of vice president. And even in my high school experience, there just really wasn't the opportunity to see educational leaders who looked like you. So here I was as a sophomore sitting in this room and she's presenting and I'm in awe, not necessarily of what she's presenting about because I couldn't tell you that. It was just of this African-American woman as the leader of a student affairs division. And I remember saying to myself, I need to get to know her. And the story that is important for you to know about Dr. Cheryl Presley, who has led various divisions at multiple universities throughout this country and has served as a mentor and a guide to so many people in her leadership, was I went up to this woman, I'm excited, here's this Black administrator, and I say, I would love for you to be my mentor. Can you be my mentor? And her immediate response was, thank you. That's such a delightful and thoughtful request. And I'm going to ask you to set up an appointment with me next week. And I want you to make a list of what a mentor means to you. And then I'd like to meet with you to go over that list. And I want to be able to see if I can meet the needs you're saying and articulating you might want from a mentor. Because I can't just be a mentor if I don't know or if I can't actually meet what you need from a mentor. And I will never forget that because Cheryl was inviting me to think about what is it that I want from someone who I want to have this formative role in my life. But then she was also inviting me to have that thought process and then dialogue with her. Clearly, we did have that conversation and she was able to meet some of those needs. And I often tell her that she is like my pastor, the pastor's pastor. And so it gives me great joy to introduce you to Dr. Cheryl Baker. I'm going to welcome and ask you to give her a God Talks welcome. Hello.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you very much. That introduction humbles me.
Well, it's my favorite story about over the almost 20 years of you knowing me. That's the memory. And, I don't know if I ever told you that in my own role as a university administrator, that was my world, every time a student said, I want you to mentor me, I always told them the same thing. Go back, make a list about what might be helpful for you, and then let's meet about it. And then when they would come back and say, I was taken aback, why did you have me do that? And I said, oh, don't worry, the same thing happened to me. And it turned out well. So I thought that maybe it was a good
and I don't know if I ever shared with you that same thing happened to me when I asked an African-American woman who was in a leadership position, and we both were working on the same campus, but that campus had 3 entities on it. It had a university, a college that was 4-year college, which is Metropolitan State College, and a community college, and then this administrative unit. And she said the same thing to me. And when I went with my list, I don't think I said this to you, but she said to me, now, there may be some things I would want you to read. Do you think you have time to read that? And are you willing to do that? I said, oh, yes, of course. And we're still friends. We became colleagues, friends. And sometimes she still fulfills the mentor role.
That's wonderful. Yeah,
and Dr. Elaine King Miller. I just made a very big difference in my life. So I'm glad to be able to pass something on that was so positive for me.
Listen, then there's a Cheryl Presley mentoring system that I have implemented. So thank you for doing this. And I've been wanting to have this opportunity with you for a while, and I'm so glad that it finally worked itself out. I'm going to jump right in and start with the question that I ask sort of every guest on God Talks. And it is, how a certain group of people might describe you if they were going to describe you. And I think I said to you on the phone that I wanted to focus on your grandson, who I know you have been a great mentor for, and really gave him some amazing opportunities when he was with you, I believe, while you were at Earlham. I can't remember. But if your grandson were to describe you to the God Talks audience, what do you think he would say?
Um, I think he would say that I'm very, very smart, spiritually grounded. He might say a religious person, but open to always talk with where a person is.
Mm.
I also think he would say that I made a significant difference in his life. Um, and maybe where he is today, it's because of that difference that I made in his life. And we continue to dialogue and talk. And I'm so pleased to say he's 29. He's doing very well,
Mm.
very, very well. And we are both very proud of him. Both Michael and I are very proud of him.
Tell us his name. Just so
Quayshawn. Quayshawn.
Quayshawn.
Yes, he's the youngest of the twins child. He's one of his sons, his oldest son. He has two sons, and he's the oldest.
Thank you. I'm gonna move. So thank you for telling how Quayshawn might describe you. I would say the same thing. So tell Quayshawn he and I are on the same that we both agree. I want to talk about your personal vision and mission for your life. And maybe that's been all the time, or maybe it's specific in this particular time we're living in. But what would you say is your personal sort of vision and mission?
I would say that it's making a difference in people's lives and maybe using the knowledge, my spirituality, or whatever I have to be a bridge to the places that they are going so that I can help facilitate that. And I think I try to do that in all relationships, both personal and professional.
Hmm.
And so in my professional life, I know I focused a lot on students of color and really all students, and women, because women still are being discriminated against in so many ways. And I know that from my experiences. So whenever I'm the positions that I've been in positions by God's grace that I've been able to make a difference to professional women, any woman actually that's working, wanting to go to school. Um, and I feel very privileged that I've been able to do that with a lot of people, because people have done that for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm standing on their shoulders. I know that that's a cliche that people use, but it's very, very true. It's because of what people have given me in my life and meant to me that I have wanted to share and give that to other people.
Which is it was going to be my next question. What happened in your life? And maybe there's some specific moments where someone was that bridge. Because I think sometimes we model things that we've seen, similar to the mentoring story we talked about. So do you have some moments in your life where someone was that bridge that kind of made you realize, oh, I think I'm going to be this kind of person too?
I've had many people that have been that bridge, and probably the experiences I remember the most are from challenges that I had in life when I didn't think that I would be able to go on. Although I always knew that God was there and I could depend on God. God was there. That made a difference. But knowing that put me in touch with other people that helped facilitate that process for me. And when I was young, 11, my mother passed, and I was the eldest of 5 children. And typically, as in Black families, if you're the eldest, then you become the pseudo mom and have all these responsibilities and roles that various people throughout my life helped me with. Uh,
Mm,
Aunts, and then other people that I met. And the same thing when I went to college. There was a Black couple, the Smedleys, who just really took me under their wing, and I learned a lot from them. And it made me dedicated to wanting to work at a predominantly white college or university and be that person of color, because there were very few people of color in any role other than direct service role at colleges and universities that were Black or Latino. So
mm,
I guess I should say Latinx. And those have been the things that have made a difference,
mm.
really. You seem
You, I want to ask a question in relation to, you started off, your first sentence was, there have been many instances and I knew that God was always there. And so I'm curious about this 11-year-old girl who has this such a formative, impactful experience of losing your mom and becomes, right, this sort of the matriarch in making at 11. How would you have described, now that you reflect on it, God being there during that time?
I would I think then I would describe it as a feeling. I always enjoyed church. I loved being in church. I loved the music. I wouldn't have said it was a spiritual feeling then, but now I would describe it that way, that I was just spiritually fed and filled.
Mm,
And I just always knew that God was there, that God would be there if no one else was there. And it may have been because of things my mother taught me and things
mm.
I learned in church listening, and pastors always saying, God is always with you. And I believed it 100%, and it carried me through. And I still believe it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So tell me more about your church growing up. The question is really centered around your image of God as a child. And so I'm curious as to what, for little Cheryl, what was your image of God?
So I grew up when my mom was living, going to an AME church. So AME Baptist, traditional Black church with music, and everyone in the pulpit were men. Never ever thought that I'd see women, and was so pleased later in life to see women in the pulpit. Um, and my image of God was this being, not necessarily, because I've talked about this with other people who said, they thought it was, this white man up in the sky that was it wasn't that. It was a spiritual being that was greater than me,
Mm.
greater than anyone that I know, and that was all knowing, and that I could depend on that spirit. We all have the ability and can depend on that spirit.
And how do you think that image of God has, well, or even has it shifted or changed over time for you?
I think it's probably expanded over time. I have never, that's an interesting question, because I don't think I ever gave it a human form, although I know Jesus was a human form.
Mhm.
But Muhammad was a human form. Um, and even as a young child, I would think, when I'd hear people, I thought about this one day, that all religions taught that their religion was the way. And if you didn't believe the way they believed, you were going to go to hell, or you wouldn't be saved. And I just never believed a loving God would do that.
Mm.
And so actually got in trouble in Sunday school and quit talking for a long time. because I asked that question. I said, why would a loving God do that? And, typical way that someone in authority can really not answer a question because they don't know the answer, and describe it as I was challenging God. And I wasn't challenging God. I was really trying to understand how you could love and let XYZ happen in any given situation. And I believe that that still exists with me. Maybe the difference would be that the form can be, I don't see it as a woman or a man, but I know that the Spirit of God can be a woman or a man in terms of who's guiding us. And so often I say Father, Mother, God. So that's a bit different than what I grew up with. And that has to do with reading and hearing spiritual leaders, that was added to my, I guess, my vision in thinking about God.
And what do you think is the through line then to your bridge building? Because I would imagine that this image of an accessible God, right, that is transcendent beyond the sort of limitations that sometimes the traditional church writ large can put God in. How has that curated your vision of, let me make a way for these folks, let me be a presence so that I can help people move to the next level? How does your faith inform your vision and mission for life?
I think maybe seeing myself as a facilitator in that role, talking to people, getting to know people, sharing who I am so that people have an understanding of, this is the perspective I've had. I'm coming from this, and this is what I believe. And that you can dream, whatever it is. By grace and faith, you can do it. And I think that's informed my work. Sometimes I share those words with people, sometimes I don't. It depends on the situation. Even in state schools where you're not supposed to do that, there have been instances when I have, many instances. And fortunately, by God's grace, those are always instances where people were very thankful and really was glad that I shared that part of me so that they could share who they were.
I'm wondering, different people from all walks of life watch these talks, and with the intent that maybe there's something in what you're sharing that's immediately applicable to their life or their experience, and they're sort of drawn to that. But I'm thinking somebody's watching this who has decided that their professional life and their faith can't coexist because of some of what you said. So they're thinking, well, this is a professional environment, so let me keep that part of myself over here. But what would you say? Because I don't think I've ever experienced you where they weren't together. And I hear what you're saying about the language might be different, but the presence of spirit has always, I don't feel that they've ever been separate. So what kind of advice, or maybe your own journey, would you say to somebody who's thinking, if I'm going to be professional, then I have to leave my spirituality over there?
I think it's, and I learned this from the Jesuits, living into your faith and your beliefs. And I think that probably was a process for me, because I can remember, and even sometimes now I will say, well, the secular part of me, da 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 da, especially if I'm being negative and ugly about something that I know I should not be negative and ugly about, because I really do believe all things are of God, and even in the most dire situation there are blessings if we choose to look for those blessings and believe that they're there. Does that answer that question? I think it's a process of growth. Probably as I had more and more experiences, it's just in me maybe now. And I don't have to think about it as much in terms of how I respond.
Right. This very similar question, I think you talked about, well, I love the story of you in Sunday school saying, okay, does this, is this really how a loving God would be? And so I'm curious, like, what in you, growing up in the reality of the world that you grew up in, even saying, like, not even seeing women in the pulpit and all those kind of things, where do you think that courage came from? Or even the seed to say, I'm going to ask this question. Or if I see a system that I don't exactly understand why it's functioning, I'm going to maybe lean into it and push a little bit. Where do you think that came from in you?
I want to say my mother, and I'll have to explain that a little bit. Uh, my mother was a very loving and kind person, and she did not allow us to say can't. You couldn't ever say, I can't do this. And to her, it was always that you can do something. You have to figure out how. She also taught me, because I was precocious, that I could not ask questions of everyone that I had. She said, you can always ask me anything you want to know, but you can't do that with everyone. And I was a very obedient child for the most part. And so, yes, um, I always kept that with me, that she had said that. And then I think it was reinforced when I had some deep voice saying, young lady, are you questioning the word of God? Well, no, I was not questioning. I just wanted to understand. Um, and so that's when I had to have faith, and my faith kept me quiet and not asking questions, because I was probably asking questions he couldn't answer
Mm,
and didn't have the knowledge to answer. And because of ego, couldn't say, um, well, we'll have to think about that, or I'll have to get back to you, because he was supposed to be all knowing because he was the teacher. And I think watching other people or reading about other people, reading about Sojourner Truth, reading
mm,
about the things that many people before me did to make life better for themselves, their family, and for Black people in general. Just, I think that's where that courage came from.
mm.
Yeah.
In so many instances of your life, and I don't know if you would use this language, so maybe try on the language I'm going to use. You've been a trailblazer, kind of the first. I'm going to step into this place. I might be wrong, but I probably would assume that at Boston College, you were the first African American woman to ever lead the Division of Student Affairs. And that's had happened in other instances in your career. Um, I'm wondering how much of that is connected to your mom's can't. That you can't, that you shouldn't say you can't do something.
I think it's directly connected to that, because, and it's, I was the first African American, period, to be in a leadership role in many of the colleges that I worked at. And I know that that was by God's grace. I never thought about it in terms of it being can't. For me, it was always, I was working, doing this in a position, and then all of a sudden I'd run up against a roadblock, and figuring out what that roadblock was. Usually it was the person that had higher level position than me, more power than me. I didn't even think of it as power then, but just the ability, because of their role, to do things I couldn't do. And I would think, oh, okay, so I need to get in that position so that XYZ could happen. And then as I learned more about diversity, more about inclusion, I realized that we had different voices, and that people see things differently, and you need to be at the table so that that can be translated to others. Sometimes they want to receive it, oftentimes not. Um, and that's related to the can'ts. with my mom. And it's also related to my just always feeling life can be better. And
Mm.
that's not in a materialistic sense. It can be better materialistically, but just better so you can be more at peace. So you can know you can do, I would tell students, have that dream. Know that you can reach for that dream. It's your dream. And it's important to have dreams. Um, so that is all related to the Kent now that you bring it up. That's a good
Mm.
article to write about.
Yep. Might be a book.
Well, we'll see. That is. It really is a good article. It's related to that.
I'm wondering, what would you speak into this audience about being the first? Because I think that we sort of look at the end game, right? The end game is that you've had an amazing trajectory professionally and have created a back loop. You know, thinking about Boston College right now, there is another African American woman who serves as the vice president. She, Joy Moore, who sort of walks in a legacy that you created, the person who's the interim after you, African American woman, who then became the first at another. What do you have to say about being a first? This is a self-interest question.
You know, what I would say about it is what our vice president elect said when she gave her speech.
Mm.
She said, I may be the first, but I will not be the last. And so at the very beginning of my career, I had the opportunity, and I didn't even know then that it was succession planning. I didn't have that language. I didn't even have that administrative knowledge, but I always would look and think about, okay, so who could take over this role that I have?
Mm.
And I've been very blessed to be able to do that. And I think blessed to even have that as a vision that I didn't think about. It was just in me to want that for people.
And do you think well, I'm imagining because you were the first and didn't have that. Um, where do you think that came from, right? Because I think sometimes people say, well, if you haven't seen it, it's hard. But you're saying, yes, well, I not only the role, but then I thought, well, then, okay, who's going to come after me? So let me be preparing the way. Where did that kind of thing come from? You said it was in you.
You know, Terrell, that's an interesting question, and I really would have to think about that more because I would say that it's my faith. I would say maybe that was my purpose. That's what I was supposed to do in life, um, and was blessed to be able to do that.
Mhm.
And so and if it's my purpose, I guess I would say it was my purpose. I didn't think about it in terms of purpose, or this is what I was meant to do, or this was my philosophy. I might have said it was my philosophy, my belief system, that this is what all people should do. But that came much later when I read more spiritual leaders that were in positions of leadership and read about leadership. That language came later.
Mhm.
But I didn't have that language initially. And that's why I say it was within me. But it was my purpose.
Mhm.
And so sometimes depending on Black churches you go to, they sometimes people would talk about, God already knows what you're going to do in life, what you're supposed to be. Um, it's determined, which that never set quite right with me either, because I thought, well, if God already knows that, why don't he just tell us? We don't have to have stuff in between. And God does tell us in many, many ways. We just have to be still and listen. And we can hear what it is God wants us to do. And with many things, I learned to say, whatever is your will, God, let it be my will.
Mm.
And that has been just a strong belief that has held me up. And even if it's not what I think I should do, there's a part of me that always knows that whatever is God's will, as long as I want it to be my will, things will be fine. As long as I'm walking with God, everything would be fine.
Mm.
So I have to share with you, and sometimes I share this when I meet with student groups, especially when I was a vice president and was working. I would tell student groups, because they look at you as being way up here. I said, you see the person here who grew. You didn't see the person who was poor, who grew up in the projects, just like many of you did. And who just moved from step to step. I never had as a young person, said I was going to be a vice president for student affairs. Matter of fact, even as an undergraduate in college, I knew who our vice president for student affairs was, but I certainly didn't want to be like that person. Which is kind of a horrible thing to say as I think about who it was, even that name coming forth in my brain. But I really didn't know all of what he did.
Mm.
And so as I learned all of what he did and where you have influence, I always think of myself as just being blessed to be in positions where I could have influence on things being different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been very satisfying to me. And I think it's also has been very helpful to the students I work with.
Mm-hmm.
Or have worked with. Mm-hmm.
I would say that personally. One of the things that's always struck me is your faith has seemed so resolute. I don't know if in the almost 20 years of knowing you, there has been a conversation that I was processing, personal life or work life or academic life, that you haven't invited me into a place of prayer, or invited me to, well, make sure you're talking to God about about that. And I've always wondered, out of what well is this woman drawing? Because sometimes I feel like it's hard to kind of lean back on that, especially because, as humans, we want to figure it out. We want to be able to, but there's, like I said, even if I had a good plan that I thought sounded really good, you might say, okay, well, I hope you pray. I hope you're going to pray about that. And I've always wondered, what are some life experiences for you that kind of made that faith so resolute that it's always present? Like I said, I don't know if I've had a conversation with you in life where it wasn't tangibly present.
I think because throughout my life, even people in my family have told me, well, you can't do this. And probably on a subconscious level, I never believed that. And so whenever I would come up against that wall or that barrier, I would just pray. And I knew by the grace of God that I wouldn't have these thoughts unless it was meant for me to do it. And if it wasn't meant for me to do it, then I would be directed elsewhere. But I have to honestly say, I can't think of anything that I've wanted that God said, no, you're not going to do this. Now, God might say, you're going to do it in a different way, and maybe you're not going to do it right now, because right now might not be the right time. But I also think, Darrell, I have to honestly say, being a female raised by a father, and I don't know, fathers probably raise sons to think that they can do whatever they want to do. And my father raised us with education is very important. It's the only thing no one can take from you. Of course, he would say it's the only thing the white man can't take from you, but really nobody can take that from you. And out of that experience comes other experiences that people want to have or that I've wanted to have. And God has always just been there and in me. Not that I always turn to God first. Many times I put my little plan together. Yeah, I'm going to do it. And then bam, no, you don't get to do it. And I did not ask God about it. And maybe that's why I really focus on saying that as I've gotten older, that God is omnipotent. And in the scriptures, it says you should pray without ceasing. And the older I got, the more I understood what prayer without ceasing meant. And to me, that's my walk with God. That's our walk with God. That's part of the prayer without ceasing. And that means God in all things, not in this part of my life, but this other part of my life. No, well. And, I'm sure that there were times that I did that and God wasn't in that part of my life and it didn't go so well. So then I'd have to ask God to come in and save me, help me.
Mhm.
And so that's a lesson learned as I move forward. Yeah.
One of the comments I made to you earlier this year was, oh, you're kind of like my pastor. And you said, huh? you said I would never have thought about that. And I wanted to just take a moment and I think I explained it to you in the sense that I think even, my daily work, right, is having this sort of pastoral presence. And no matter what's happening, filtering through this lens of spirit, where is God present? Where do we see God in the midst of this? And I feel like, yes, there's a natural part of that, but it's also endemic of my profession. Most people are coming to me through that lens. And so it's really easy to tap into it. And I find outside of ministry, sometimes you're talking to people and that isn't a distinct way in which they communicate. I've referenced it multiple times as we've been talking. There isn't a time, even at, I feel like 19 years old, talking to you where that wasn't there. Like it's a through line with you that I feel no matter what we're talking about, there's always a grounding in that spirituality. So I know that that's true for me. So yes, I'm going to say to all God Talks people that, and if I guess if I was on the committee of ministry, I could just help you move through the process to multiple pathways to your licensure. But I'm curious, how have you seen this play out in, particularly I'm thinking about your family, because, here's this role that you surrogated at 11 to now. How do you see your spirituality impacting the way you are a sibling, the way you are a mom, the way you are a grandmother? So moving a little bit from the student affairs part or the professional life to your interpersonal life, how has this grounding in spirituality shown up there?
I think knowing, I don't know how people can have hope if they don't have God. I've asked people that. I mean, and most of the time they'll tell me something and I'll think, well, that's God, that's spirit, because they're not saying I. And I think spirit shows up in lots of different ways, depending on how we were raised and how we were socialized, what we were read, what we've been touched by. And in order for me to have hope, in order for me to believe that life will be better, there has to be something greater than myself or greater than you and your humanness. I believe God works through you and your humanness to accomplish whatever needs to be accomplished at any given point in time. But to think that it's just you by yourself, how could it be us by ourselves? I don't know. I don't. And I've gone through many changes from a religion that was very prescriptive, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that, to starting to think about, do I really believe that?
Mm.
And then being presented with information that expanded that. I can't even remember my sister who's next to me, who's always read metaphysical books. And I didn't even know what metaphysical books were. And I'm so embarrassed to say that I said to her, you know, that's not of God, that's of the devil.
Mm.
And she's a very high-spirited person. And she just shook her head, you know. It was just like, because that was my limitation.
Mm.
And so learning to, you know, and starting to read some of the books she read made me a better person, expanded my vision. And it helped me to know to not to be judgmental and to listen instead of having this preconceived notion of what someone is or what someone is doing or reading.
Mhm.
So that's just living life and being open to being a lifelong learner in all aspects of my life.
Yeah. Do you think that that affected your parenting with how you dealt with your kids? You know,
I,
then of course how you've been a grandparent. To thinking about, I'm thinking about Quayshawn again, and just the way in which you nurtured that relationship. How has your spirituality been a grounding force in that?
well, I don't know. That's complex with Quayshawn because I'm reading the Stoic, which is this philosophical belief, really, that everything is within you, but that you're doing it. Although, as I read through it, he says, I told Quayshawn, I said, well, this is what I call God, the God in me. And he was like, yeah, I know,
Mhm.
but he's, you know, taking it from a different perspective. So I think he's starting to see the connections. Um, I was very blessed that I took my children to church, to Sunday school, maybe so much so that both of my sons said they were never going to church when they got old enough to be able to make a decision themselves and weren't living with me. And one of them, their partners at the time, and the mother of his child said, I just don't understand it. He prays at night, but he won't go to church with me. And I said, because our beliefs are more than just what's at church. It's what we need to live with all of the time. And so I learned as I got older, and I think I was able to share that with other people, which was good. And I think that's in my kids. I also believe in angels. And recently, I would have said I didn't believe in demons, but recently I think I do and have experienced it.
Mhm.
Um, but God is bigger than the demons, and we know that. We know that from reading the Bible and scriptures. And so it's just being aware and knowledgeable that's important, I think.
Mhm.
So much, I think so many things I took for granted. That's what the in me is. And I think that's my mother's spirit within me. That's
Mhm.
God's spirit that's within me that has guided me throughout and protected me throughout my life.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
As you know, and you and I have talked about this briefly in some ways, we're living in the middle of a racial and a health pandemic, a
yeah.
world that's I think people have just been worn thin. We were already thin, but I think this season has just worn people thin. And God Talks, I've been asking folks to sort of offer their thoughts about how do you connect in spirit when it feels like you're just worn thin. And I'm curious to what your thoughts would be about those thin places and still
Yeah,
finding a connection.
I think those thin places are being overwhelmed. And I think we get overwhelmed when we think we have to do or I have to do, as opposed to God, what is it you would have me to do within this situation? And just bless us, bless our country, bless this world. And also maybe understanding from when we think about the pandemic piece, I think that that's when it's really important to have God, because both in the racial pandemic and the health pandemic, those things existed underneath the surface. And someone has come forth and made it okay for that discontent or the superiority of race that people may have thought. And it wasn't, they knew that it wasn't proper to talk about it or to feel that way. And then you have someone that says that that's okay. And it bubbles up. And if you talk to people individually, they'll tell you that. Everyone can give you examples of racism and that's comes out of white superiority that we don't fully understand. At least I feel I don't fully understand it. On an academic level, I can quote scholars and say, well, historically this happened. And all of that is true. But in our response to it, it really has to be just knowing God is all. I think I heard Maya Angelou say that when she was asked how to define God. She said, God is all.
Mm.
And that is irrespective of whatever situation you're in. And believing that you can be protected. Being protected doesn't mean you're foolish and you don't do the things health professionals tell you to do. Being protective doesn't mean that you ignore the racism that exists, but learning maybe different ways of working with people so that they can understand whatever the subconscious is that's leading them to see some things that really they're seeing through this being superior. And it's not just race. Sometimes it's being superior sex, gender, women. I mean, that has been throughout the history of this country. When you think about the fact that you had to have amendments for Black people to be whole and not 3/4 of a citizen, amendments for women not to be property and to have the right to vote.
Mm-hmm.
And because we don't teach civics in school anymore, I think that there's a lot of people that don't know and they don't understand that. And so the being thin has to do with our wanting to fix something right away.
Mm.
And if it's our role, if God means for us to fix something right away, we should be able to do that and be at peace.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're not at peace, we're worn thin. And usually that's because we wanted to fix something we couldn't fix. But that we have to live through and be part of making better, and hopefully it will eventually be fixed. But even if it's fixed, there will be something else because we are humans, and there's something about being human that we want to think, well, if I excel, I should be rewarded for this. If I excel, I'm better than. And that's the problem. I'm better than that comes. No, that's not it. But that's a very simplistic way, I think, of looking at it. So when you're worn thin, pray and pray and pray. We have to be, there's this term, we just have to stay prayed up. That's true. Pray without ceasing. We have to pray and pray. And praying does not mean that we don't do something about it, that we're not actively involved. And we do get tired. And when we get tired, we have to do what's necessary for us as individuals to become rejuvenated. Right. And have the faith and belief that we can become rejuvenated and that things will be better, and to see the good that is coming out of every single situation. Right. Yeah. I hope that answers the question you were asking.
No, I think it definitely offers a perspective and I appreciated I feel like it was a holistic perspective too, because how many times I was reading an article yesterday that says when the church needs something, they go to you. When you need something, the church says, oh, go pray about it. And so people were commenting about what that meant. And I think I appreciated you saying yes, and pray, and there's a level of action. You will have to be doing something. Your prayer isn't to sort of say, well, God, I have no agency. Your prayer is saying, I want to make sure that my agency is curated through the Spirit. And that's how I think, which is a very different thing than sort of just I'm just sitting here because Lord, I prayed. So, I'm trusting that you're going to do something, and you're not really expecting
anything out of it. God, what would you have me to do in this situation? It has to be silent meditation so that we can hear and know when to be still and when to be active. And when maybe we need both of those integrated, working together and knowing that.
I think that's very important. I want to end on a personal a note, but a kind of a funny note, and it's about your discernment. We've talked about this before. It took me years to talk to you about this because I had to get to a different place in my own life to receive it. But I think sometimes in mentorship, if you're mentoring someone with a spiritual lens, I think then you allow yourself to lean in and offer insight that you may not normally offer. And I'm curious, if I want you to talk a little bit about discernment, because I think there's people watching this who are mentoring people right now. They are walking alongside maybe people who are curating their desire to do ministry. In the United Church of Christ, we have a thing called member in discernment, and it's someone who's literally in discernment about ministry. And sometimes they're being mentored by other faithful pastoral leaders. The story that I've had before is you and I were riding. You were I don't know where we were coming from. I think you had picked me up from Cleveland Circle, and we were heading back to campus. It was at the end of school. I had packed up all of my stuff, and I was getting ready to leave to go off to graduate school. And we were driving in the car, and for some reason, you decided to tell me about an LGBT person in your family. And you were telling me the story about this, and I'm sitting here thinking, why is she talking to me about this? Like, I remember this 21-ish feeling of like, why is she talking to me about this? And you told me the whole story. We picked up some things. You continued, and as you were dropping me off, because I was staying at a friend's house before I left to graduate school. You said, Darrell, I wonder if there's some part of you that resonates with that story. That was it. You didn't sort of say, here's what I'm thinking, or here's what I'm feeling, or here's a theological nothing. You just said, I wonder if there's a part of you that resonates with that story. Now, the backdrop of that is I went upstairs mortified because I was like, what is she trying to say? No, in my mind, I was like, what is she trying to say? I don't understand. Is this, what? And of course, sometime very quickly later in graduate school in a totally different context where the languaging around sexual orientation and everything was dramatically different than at a religiously affiliated institution that was struggling with how to really create
Mhm.
the safest space for all students. But I was so ever grateful later. I mean, not immediate, but later that there was an invitation from somebody who I respected, who I loved, who I cared about. And it wasn't a forceful invitation, but it was an invitation. Here's a story that's personal that I'm willing to share with you. But I'm also inviting you to ask, do you see at any point that and I've always wondered, what was the type of discernment you went through? Because I don't believe it was just intellectual discernment, but in a mentoring relationship that you would invite me to be free. Because if I'm going to be honest with you, it was an invitation to freedom that I could not have articulated or offered to myself at that time. And as mentors, I think we might have insight sometimes to a
Mhm.
moment of freedom for the people we're walking alongside. But something in you had to say, this is the time, this is the clarity. And I've never asked you kind of what,
So
yeah,
um, in a situation where I'm being taped to ask me,
right.
um, Darrell, I think when you live and walk and can say, Lord, what is it you would have me to do?
Mm,
That comes through spirit, sometimes in ways that you don't even know it's going to come. And of course, we have the choice of following it or not. And, I'm just thankful to God. I'm thankful to all the religious, spiritual experiences I've had that lets me trust that and not really think much about it. And know if that is on the tip of my tongue to say that. And, and I think said other things to you that shocked you when you were an undergraduate. And you were like, how did you know that? I said, I don't know. It was just there. It was in me. And that's all I can say about discernment. It's not something I consciously think about, but I do think it's integrated with my spiritual beliefs, the trust that I have,
mm,
and the belief that all things are of God, no matter what. Even this situation we're living in, where we have someone that needs to be out of that White House, actually has enough power to say, no, you're not coming in. I don't care that you won. But it's
mm,
making us all think about, what is democracy? What are we taking for granted and have not cherished that we
mm.
need to cherish? And what kind of government do we want to live under, instead of just these flowery words about democracy? And so now we have examples for those that want to have those examples, because certainly there's a lot of people that don't believe that way. There are people that prefer an authoritative government, because then they don't have to think not
Mm.
deeply about something. Just do what they tell you to do and go on. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. I think because like I said, I do think that there are moments, um, even in my own mentoring of people, that I've thought, oh, this something has welled up, and right, and you have that hesitancy. You don't want to overstep. You don't want to, but then it's like in not doing it, you just never know the impact that you
Mm.
could have on that person. That car ride is something I have thought about at different points in my life, and I've just been so grateful that you took the risk of the moment to say maybe you should think about that. And obviously I did.
Trusting God, however you define God, is trusting that spirit, trusting it enough to know, even if you haven't thought about something, you haven't intellectually discerned. And and I think that the two work together. The intellectual discernment is there, and it doesn't have to always be conscious. It's when all of our experiences come together and we trust enough to know this is what I'm supposed to do.
Mm. That's
Or
great. That's
or sometimes I find myself saying things that it hadn't even occurred to me to say it. It just came out. And so then, I have to quickly put it together so that, I don't look like a fool that things are just coming out I haven't thought about. Um, and that's trusting again to know, well, okay, maybe I didn't want to go there, but I'm supposed to go there. So now that I'm there, we got to deal with it.
right. Mm. No, thank you for that. That's a gift. I really appreciate your time being with me. There's two other things I'd love to do before we end our space together. The first one is as a thank you to everyone who's a part of God Talks. I ask those who are watching to make a donation to a particular cause of interest. And you and I were talking about briefly that there is a COVID relief fund at Colorado State University that's a part of their Legacies project. And one of those legacies projects is honoring your service. And as I mentioned, I use the term Trailblazer. But can you tell us a little bit about why that COVID relief fund for students is important to you? And folks can see at the bottom of the screen how they can join you in donating.
When first of all, I just felt full when I was told that the college had set up this fund to help with the things that are not in the financial aid forms, that are real life experiences that people have, and that some money could make a difference between them staying in school or not being in school. People that come from families that are well off materially, they can go to their family and ask for, and usually get, as long as they're aligned with whatever the values are of their family. When they're not aligned with family values, then I know that that's problematic, whatever they may be and for whatever reasons. But to know that just providing this will make a difference in someone's life. And I think I'm hoping that even beyond COVID, the Colorado State in their Health and Human Services College will continue that fund, because people have life challenges and often there's no door for them to knock on for help, and it provides that bit of help and bit of relief.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So folks, as you're seeing it down at the bottom of the screen, it'll stay with us for a while, but please join Dr. Presley in donating to CSU, particularly this Legacies project, one of whom the fund is honoring the life and work of Dr. Cheryl Presley. I always sort of end by trying to offer a blessing, and my hope in sitting with the amazing people I've had a chance to sit with is to hear what Spirit is offering as a blessing to them before we end our formal time together. And what came up to me is this imagery of a well, and the sense that, if you are dipping out of a well, you can dip into the well and have a full bucket. And if you give someone else of that bucket, you can still go back because the well isn't empty. And so my blessing for you is that you continue to dip into God's never-ending well. And as God uses you to offer drink to so many people, and I have drank from the well, that you always are reminded that the relationship you have with the Spirit is that your well will never run dry. And so it's okay if you give into someone else, because when you need to go back into that well, the well will yet again be full, that you will yet again be nourished, and that everything you need from Spirit has available to you, and it won't run out. And I think it's because I want to say specifically that what you offer is out of Spirit. And so when you offer it out of spirit, then it cannot be replenished in any other way but by spirit. And
Mm.
because spirit doesn't have the same limitation, then there's an elasticity there that if it was coming out of some other place, like I love the imagery of if it's just me, if it's just the I, then yes, that the Cheryl might get tired. And I'm not saying you don't. But in this sense, so much of what you offer to the world is from that never ending well. So may you feel it replenishing you, renewing you, strengthening you in ways that you could not have imagined, or maybe in some ways that you think, well, Lord, me? No, I haven't. And the Spirit says, no, you have. This is yours. Second imagery that I had for you, or really blessing to offer to you, is that one of the crisis moments in our world is that we've lost a sense of elderhood. We've lost a sense of people who want to be eldered and people who want to be elders. And I name for you that in my own life, but I think in so many other people's lives, you did not put your elderhood mantle aside, but you fully embraced it, probably even before it was time. And as a result, it's been healing to friends, healing to family, and healing to colleagues, healing to so many people who've stopped by on this journey. And what they actually needed was an elder in the community in a way that's been so absent. And so I bless you for the mantle of elderhood that you have put on your shoulders, that you are that sense for us. The term that comes to mind, and I don't even I need to do more research. I've heard it, is sort of that villages had a griot, a person that they would go to who has the sage wisdom of not only the past, but also the present, and they can even foresee what is to come. And I think that mantle, that spiritual understanding of what that is, from the moment you started talking, I heard that term and I heard that imagery and I see that in you. And so may you walk into that and see yourself walking and ushering community and communities into that sense of what has been, what is, but most importantly, what God is yet able to do.
I thank you for that. I thank you for those beautiful imageries and compliments. And I just ask God to let me live into all that God would have me to do.
Amen.
So, thank you for inviting me for this discussion.
Thank you so much. So hold on one second. I'll come back in one moment. Everyone, thank you so much for watching God Talks and just indulging me to share with you a very, very special person in my heart. So God Talks again is now only twice a month. Our next person is going to be the Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson, who serves as our Associate General Minister for Global Ministries in the United Church of Christ. So look forward to seeing you at a future God Talks. Hope you're having a blessed week.